The palace has not confirmed an emergency order, but the claim has touched one of the most sensitive nerves in royal life. Because when Catherine's name is placed beside the crown jewels, the story is never just about diamonds. It is about authority, succession, trust, and the future face of the monarchy. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed that King Charles III has signed any order naming Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the sole guardian of the crown jewels. It remains unconfirmed whether any such arrangement exists. But the very idea has captured attention because the crown jewels are not ordinary royal possessions. They are among the most powerful symbols of monarchy itself, carrying centuries of ceremony, sovereignty, conquest, continuity, and national memory. That is why this story matters. The crown jewels are not simply treasures displayed behind glass at the Tower of London. They are the physical language of kingship and queenship. They appear at coronations, state openings, and moments when the monarchy must remind the nation that its authority is older than any one reign. The crowns, sceptres, orbs, swords, and ceremonial pieces do not merely sparkle. They tell the country that the crown continues, no matter who wears it. So when royal observers begin asking whether Catherine could be placed closer to those symbols, the question becomes much larger than one headline. Catherine is not yet queen. She is not the sovereign. She does not hold the constitutional position of the monarch. But she is already central to the future image of the royal family. Beside Prince William, the Prince of Wales, she represents the next chapter of the monarchy. Calm, disciplined, family-centered, and carefully prepared for a public that now watches royal symbolism more closely than ever before. If her name is linked to the crown jewels, even through speculation, it suggests that people are beginning to see her not only as a princess, but as a future custodian of royal continuity. And that is where the first layer of tension begins. For King Charles III, the crown jewels are part of the sacred inheritance of the monarchy he spent a lifetime preparing to serve. They are tied to his coronation, his authority, and the ancient role he now carries. Any suggestion that their future symbolic guardianship could be associated with Catherine would immediately raise questions about legacy. Is this about protecting tradition? Is it about preparing the next reign? Or is it about the palace carefully shaping the public's understanding of who will one day carry the monarchy forward? That question becomes even more sensitive because Queen Camilla also stands inside the story. As queen, Camilla is part of Charles's reign and part of the ceremonial life that surrounds the crown. She has worn important jewels, stood beside the king at state occasions, and occupied a public role that once seemed almost impossible given the controversy of earlier decades. Her place is real, and it is visible. Yet monarchy always looks beyond the present. It must honor the current reign while preparing the next. And that can create a quiet tension when symbols begin to move in the public imagination toward Catherine. Was this really about guardianship, or was it about the future being arranged through symbols before the palace says anything aloud? That is the question royal watchers are likely asking. Because in monarchy, the person trusted with symbols is often the person being prepared for responsibility. A crown, a tiara, a brooch, or a ceremonial jewel can communicate confidence without a press release. It can suggest that the institution sees someone as steady enough to carry history without making it personal. It can show the public who is being placed near the center of the royal story. Catherine's power has always grown in that quiet way. She has not built her role through dramatic speeches or public confrontation. She has built it through restraint, consistency, and an ability to make royal duty look calm even when the world around the family feels unsettled. That is why the idea of her being linked to the crown jewels feels so powerful. It speaks to trust. It suggests that her future role may be understood not only emotionally, but institutionally. But it also raises a more difficult question. If Catherine becomes increasingly associated with the monarchy's most sacred symbols, what does that say about the pace of succession planning? Not succession in the legal sense, because no official change has been confirmed, but succession in the visual and emotional sense. The country does not begin preparing for a future monarch only on the day the throne passes. It begins much earlier through images, ceremonies, responsibilities, and the gradual shaping of public confidence. That is why the crown jewels sit at the center of the story. They are not simply beautiful. They are proof of continuity. They survived reigns, crises, wars, scandals, and national change. They remind the public that the crown is larger than the individual who holds it. To connect Catherine to them, even in speculation, is to connect her to that larger story. It places her not only beside William, but beside the long line of women who have helped carry the monarchy's image through moments of transition. And that is what makes the claim so emotionally charged. Some will see the idea as natural preparation for a future queen. Others may see it as premature, a sign that the next reign is already being visually assembled while Charles and Camilla remain at the center of the present one. Both interpretations reveal something important. The monarchy's future is no longer distant in the public imagination. It is being watched now, piece by piece, symbol by symbol, gesture by gesture. For now, nothing has been officially confirmed. But the question itself tells us how much attention is gathering around Catherine's future authority. Because when the Princess of Wales is discussed in relation to the crown jewels, the real subject is not ownership. It is trust. It is legacy. It is whether the palace is quietly teaching the public to see her as one of the central guardians of the monarchy's next age. To understand why this matters, we have to look at what the crown jewels truly represent, and why the question of who stands closest to them may reveal far more about power, succession, and the future of the royal family than any official statement ever could. The crown jewels matter because they are not simply royal treasures. They are the visible architecture of monarchy itself. Long before the public sees a speech, a signature, or a constitutional explanation, it sees the crown, the scepter, the orb, and the ancient objects that tell the nation that royal authority has passed through centuries of crisis and still remains standing. That is why any suggestion of Catherine being placed closer to those symbols immediately creates a larger question. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed an emergency order, and it remains unconfirmed that she has been named sole guardian of the crown jewels. But the idea has power because guardianship, even when discussed symbolically, touches the deepest issue in royal life. Who is trusted to protect not only the objects of monarchy, but the meaning behind them? The crown jewels are different from personal royal jewelry. A brooch may carry family history. A tiara may carry elegance, memory, and dynastic meaning. But the crown jewels belong to the ceremonial heart of sovereignty. They are connected to coronation, state authority, sacred ritual, and the public imagination of kingship. They are not simply worn. They are witnessed. They do not only decorate the monarch. They help explain why the monarchy still claims continuity in a modern world that questions almost everything. And that is where Catherine's name becomes so significant. For years, she has been gradually shaped into a figure of future continuity, not through loud ambition, not through sudden authority, but through a steady accumulation of trust. Her public role has become increasingly connected to stability, service, restraint, and the careful emotional language of the next reign. If royal observers now imagine her near the monarchy's most sacred symbols, it is because the public has already begun to see her as someone who could carry them with seriousness. But was this really about jewels, or was it about preparing the nation to recognize future authority before it officially arrives? That question sits beneath every royal transition. The monarchy never waits until the final moment to teach the public who comes next. It does so slowly, through appearances, responsibilities, ceremonial positioning, and symbols that appear to move almost quietly from one generation toward another. The public may not always notice the first sign, but over time, a pattern emerges, and once that pattern is recognized, every new gesture begins to feel connected. For Charles, this would be a delicate balance. As king, he remains the center of royal authority. The crown jewels belong to the ceremonial structure of his reign, and any discussion of their future meaning reflects back on his own responsibility as monarch. Yet Charles also knows that no sovereign owns the future forever. A reign must preserve what it has inherited, but it must also prepare what it will one day leave behind. That is the difficult truth behind every symbol attached to the crown. Queen Camilla's position adds another layer of sensitivity. As the king's wife and queen, she stands inside the present reign's ceremonial life. Her role is established, visible, and tied to Charles's public identity. But the future of the monarchy passes through William and Catherine, and that reality changes the emotional meaning of every symbol associated with succession. Camilla may represent the present chapter, while Catherine increasingly represents the next. The palace must honor both without making either appear diminished. That is not easy. If Catherine is associated too strongly with the crown's most powerful symbols, some may see it as premature, as though the next reign is being assembled before the current one has finished speaking for itself. If she is kept too far from those symbols, others may question whether the palace is doing enough to prepare the public for the future. The monarchy must therefore move with great care, because in royal life, symbolic closeness can look like authority even when no formal authority has changed. This is where William becomes unavoidable in the story. The future king's credibility is not built by him alone. It is built through the image of the household that will stand around him. Catherine's symbolic strength reinforces William's future reign because she gives that future emotional shape. She makes it feel calm, familiar, and rooted in continuity. If she is trusted with historic jewels, ceremonial symbolism, or major state appearances, the message is not only about her. It is about the monarchy William is expected to lead, and that raises the stakes for everyone. For Charles, the challenge is legacy. He must protect the dignity of his reign while making sure the next one is ready. For Camilla, the challenge is place. She must remain central to the present while the future naturally gathers attention elsewhere. For William, the challenge is timing. He must appear ready without appearing impatient. And for Catherine, the challenge is restraint. She must carry growing symbolic weight without making it look like personal advancement. That is why the idea of guardianship feels so powerful even when the claim itself remains unconfirmed. A guardian does not merely possess something. A guardian protects it, understands it, and accepts responsibility for keeping its meaning intact. In a monarchy, that kind of trust is never casual. It suggests judgment. It suggests confidence. It suggests that the person being placed near the symbol is expected to understand its history, its danger, and its power. Royal observers may therefore be watching for signs that Catherine's role is becoming less decorative and more structural. They may watch which jewel she wears, where she stands at major ceremonies, how often she appears beside William at moments of national importance, and whether the palace increasingly frames her as part of the monarchy's long-term stability rather than simply as a beloved royal figure. Because behind the visible glitter lies a serious institutional question. The crown jewels are not only reminders of the past, they are promises about the future. And once Catherine's name is placed near them, even in speculation, the monarchy begins to look as though it is quietly arranging not just who will wear the symbols one day, but who is already trusted to understand what they mean. And once that possibility enters the conversation, the story moves into far more sensitive territory, because the deeper question is not simply who stands closest to the crown jewels. It is whether the palace is beginning to show the world who it believes can carry the crown's future without breaking the weight of its past. That question sits at the center of every royal transition, because the crown's future is never protected by one person alone. It is protected by the people trusted to stand closest to its symbols before the public fully understands why they are there. And when Catherine is discussed in relation to the monarchy's most sacred objects, the conversation begins to move beyond jewelry and into the architecture of future power. This is why the claim, even unconfirmed, feels connected to something much deeper. It suggests a public instinct that Catherine is no longer being viewed only as a supportive figure beside William, but as a stabilizing force in her own right. That does not mean she has been handed formal authority over the crown jewels. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed that. But it does mean the idea feels believable to many royal watchers, because her role has already been moving in that direction symbolically. And symbolism often arrives before formal power. A monarchy prepares the public through repeated images, not sudden explanations. A future queen appears beside the heir. She attends ceremonies that carry historical weight. She is associated with heirloom pieces, formal receptions, national services, and moments of public reassurance. Slowly, the viewer stops seeing her as someone waiting for a future role and begins seeing her as part of the future already. That is the quiet shift Catherine has been undergoing for years. But if that shift becomes too visible, it creates pressure around everyone else. For Charles, the challenge is legacy. He must protect the current reign while ensuring the next one is not left unprepared. A king who thinks only of the present risks, leaving uncertainty behind. A king who thinks too visibly of the future risks, making his own reign look transitional before its meaning has fully settled. That is the difficult line Charles must walk, especially when symbols as powerful as the crown jewels are pulled into public discussion. For Camilla, the issue is more personal and more delicate. Her position beside Charles is tied to the present monarchy, to the long effort to normalize her role, and to the visible dignity she now carries as queen. Yet the crown's long-term story naturally moves toward William and Catherine. That does not erase Camilla's importance, but it does place her inside a different frame. She belongs to the chapter Charles is writing now, while Catherine increasingly belongs to the chapter the public is already imagining next. That contrast is not necessarily cruel, but it is unavoidable. Every monarchy depends on continuity, and continuity requires a kind of emotional handover before any official handover happens. The public must learn where to place its confidence. It must know who can be trusted with ceremony, who can steady a national moment, who can represent the crown without making the role appear personal. Catherine's appeal lies partly in that discipline. She rarely seems to compete with the institution. She seems to absorb its demands and reflect them back in a softer, more modern form. That is why the crown jewels become such a powerful symbolic test. They are too important to be used carelessly in public imagination. They belong to a world of coronations, sacred ritual, ancient authority, and state identity. To place Catherine near that world, even through rumor or commentary, is to raise the question of whether she has become one of the monarchy's safest vessels for continuity. Not because she seeks power, but because she appears able to carry it without making it look like possession. Was this really about one alleged order, or was it a sign of how the public now understands Catherine's place in the royal structure? That question is important because public belief can become one of the monarchy's strongest forces. If people already see Catherine as a future guardian of royal tradition, then the palace does not need to announce that idea loudly. It only needs to allow the image to grow. A tiara here, a state occasion there, a carefully chosen appearance, a steady presence beside William, and gradually the future becomes visible without ever appearing forced. But this is where the internal dynamics become more complicated. William's future reign will require both authority and emotional reassurance. He will need to be seen as strong enough to lead, but not so severe that the monarchy feels distant. Catherine helps solve that problem. She gives the next reign a human center, a sense of family continuity, and a visual calm that can soften the weight of kingship. If she is increasingly associated with the crown's deepest symbols, that association strengthens William as much as it strengthens her. And that may be one of the hidden motivations behind the fascination with this story. The question is not only whether Catherine is trusted with jewels, it is whether Catherine's trustworthiness helps make the next monarchy feel safer. In a period of public scrutiny, health concerns, family fractures, and uncertainty about what the crown should look like in the modern age, the palace needs figures who can carry ancient symbolism without making it feel outdated. Catherine's strength is that she can make tradition look composed rather than heavy, and modernity look respectful rather than disruptive. That balance may be exactly what the monarchy needs. Yet balance always has a cost. If Catherine becomes the visual center of future continuity, Camilla's symbolic role may begin to feel more limited by comparison. If William and Catherine are increasingly read as the guardians of what comes next, Charles and Camilla must be protected from appearing like figures being gently moved into history. That is why any discussion around the crown jewels is so sensitive. It does not only suggest trust in Catherine, it also raises the question of how the present reign preserves its dignity while the next one gathers strength. This is where historical memory enters the story. Royal objects have always outlived the people who wore them, guarded them, or appeared beside them. Crowns pass on, jewels reappear. Regalia waits in silence until history calls it forward again. The people change, but the symbols remain. That is the promise and the cruelty of monarchy. It gives individuals extraordinary roles, then eventually asks them to hand those roles back to the institution. For Catherine, that means any symbolic closeness to the crown jewels would be a privilege, but also a burden. It would ask her to carry the weight of past queens, future expectations, public scrutiny, and the long shadow of British royal history. It would ask her to become not merely the woman beside the future king, but one of the people trusted to preserve the emotional meaning of the monarchy itself. And once that possibility enters the conversation, the story moves into far more consequential territory. Because the real question is no longer whether an emergency order has been signed. It is whether the monarchy is quietly preparing Catherine to become the living bridge between the crown's ancient symbols and the uncertain future waiting just beyond the present reign. That possibility is where the story becomes more urgent, because once Catherine is imagined as the living bridge between the crown's ancient symbols and its uncertain future, the question no longer sits quietly inside royal commentary. It begins to press against the public image of the monarchy itself. The issue is not simply whether an order exists. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed that it does. The issue is why so many people are now prepared to believe that Catherine could be trusted with such weight. That is the real turning point. A monarchy can deny a rumor, ignore a rumor, or allow a rumor to fade, but it cannot easily control the instinct that makes the rumor feel possible. And in this case, the instinct is revealing. It suggests that Catherine has crossed a symbolic threshold in the public imagination. She is no longer viewed only as the woman beside the future king. She is increasingly seen as someone who could protect the visual and emotional authority of the crown itself. That perception changes everything. For Charles, the pressure becomes more delicate because any discussion of Catherine's closeness to the crown jewels reflects back on his own reign. If the palace were to distance itself too sharply from the idea, it could appear anxious about succession. If it allowed the idea to grow unchecked, it could make the present reign look as though it is already being overshadowed by the next. The king must therefore protect two images at once: the authority of the monarch who reigns now, and the readiness of the couple who will one day inherit the burden. This is the kind of balance that defines royal survival. It also places Camilla in a sensitive position. As queen, she remains part of the ceremonial center of the present reign, but the future does not naturally gather around her. It gathers around William and Catherine. That does not reduce her official place beside Charles, but it does shape how the public reads symbolism. If Catherine becomes more strongly associated with the crown's most sacred objects, Camilla's role may begin to look more firmly tied to Charles's chapter, rather than the monarchy's long-term visual identity. Was this simply a matter of public fascination, or was it exposing a deeper structure inside the royal household? That question matters because royal institutions rarely move in straight lines. They prepare gradually, through layered decisions that may appear ordinary until they are seen together. A state appearance, a jewel loan, a carefully placed photograph, a more prominent ceremonial role, a moment when the future king and queen appear not as supporting figures, but as anchors of national reassurance. None of these details alone proves a hidden plan, but together they can create a pattern that royal watchers begin to study with increasing seriousness. And patterns can become powerful. If palace advisors are thinking about the next reign, they would not only be thinking about law or ceremony, they would also be thinking about emotional acceptance. The public must feel that the transition, whenever it comes, is not a rupture. It must look natural, dignified, and already understood. Catherine's symbolic strength helps with that. She can make ancient regalia feel less remote, not by modernizing it loudly, but by carrying tradition with enough composure that the old and the new appear to belong together. That is a rare political gift inside a monarchy, but it is also a dangerous burden. The more Catherine is positioned as a figure of continuity, the more every gesture around her becomes loaded. If she wears a historic jewel, it may be read as preparation. If she does not, it may be read as restraint. If she stands beside William at a major national moment, it may be interpreted as reassurance. If she is absent, speculation may grow. Once a royal figure becomes a symbol of the future, even silence begins to speak. This is where the conflict moves from private tension into public meaning. The royal family may experience these matters as questions of duty, timing, health, workload, and tradition. The public, however, experiences them as images. It sees who appears steady. It sees who is being photographed beside whom. It sees whose presence calms a room, whose absence raises questions, and whose role begins to feel larger without any official announcement. That is why the crown jewels, even as an unconfirmed subject, have become such a powerful focal point. They give a visible form to an invisible question: who is trusted with the future? The answer, for many viewers, is beginning to look increasingly clear. Yet that clarity carries consequences. If Catherine is seen as the crown's safest future guardian, then William's coming reign gains emotional strength before it begins. But at the same time, Charles's present reign becomes more vulnerable to comparison. Every sign of readiness from the Waleses may reassure the public, while quietly reminding them that the monarchy is already thinking beyond the king. That is not disloyalty. It is the reality of succession. But it can be painful, because succession always asks the present to make room for what comes next. This has happened before in royal history, though never in exactly the same way. Every long monarchy eventually creates a shadow reign in the public imagination. The heir becomes familiar, the heir's spouse becomes studied, and the next generation begins to absorb attention before power formally changes hands. What makes the current moment especially sensitive is the combination of modern media, public scrutiny, health concerns, family tension, and the speed at which symbols are now interpreted. A single image can travel around the world in minutes. A jewel choice can become a headline before the palace has time to explain anything. That creates a new kind of institutional risk. If the palace appears too secretive, speculation fills the space. If it appears too open, it may fuel the very questions it wants to calm. If it elevates Catherine's symbolic role too quickly, critics may accuse the monarchy of dressing the future before the present has finished. If it holds her back, supporters may wonder whether the institution is failing to prepare the public for the inevitable. There is no perfect path, only a series of carefully judged steps, and every step now seems to matter. For William, the implication is equally serious. His future authority will depend not only on his own readiness, but on whether the public believes the monarchy around him is already coherent. Catherine's role is central to that belief. She does not merely soften his image. She completes it. She gives the future reign emotional balance, visual dignity, and a sense of family continuity that helps the institution feel less exposed. If she is associated with the crown's most sacred symbols, that association strengthens the idea that the next monarchy is not being improvised. It is being prepared, but preparation can look like pressure. That is the tension now surrounding the story. The alleged emergency order may remain unconfirmed, but the conversation around it has already revealed how intensely the monarchy's future image is being watched. It has shown that Catherine's role is no longer interpreted only through popularity or personal admiration. It is interpreted through succession, stability, and the survival of royal meaning in a changing age. And that is where the final part of this story becomes impossible to ignore. Because the real consequence is not only whether Catherine has been placed near the crown jewels. It is whether the monarchy has reached a point where the public already sees her as the person capable of carrying what the crown cannot afford to lose. And that is the point at which the story becomes larger than the alleged order itself. Because what the crown cannot afford to lose is not only a collection of historic objects, however priceless they may be. It cannot afford to lose continuity. It cannot afford to lose confidence. It cannot afford to lose the public's belief that the monarchy knows where it is going, even when the road ahead is uncertain. That is why Catherine's name carries such force in this conversation. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed that she has been named sole guardian of the crown jewels, and no official emergency order has been announced. But the claim has still created a powerful reaction because it feels connected to a truth already visible in royal life. Catherine is becoming central to how the future of the monarchy is imagined. This is the deeper meaning behind the entire story. The crown jewels are not merely relics from another age. They are objects that turn monarchy from an idea into something the public can see. They give shape to authority, history, and inheritance. But their meaning depends on the people placed around them. A crown in a vault is a historic object. A crown carried through ceremony becomes a national symbol. And a future queen associated with that symbolism becomes part of the story long before the formal moment arrives. That is where Catherine's role becomes so important. She represents a future that the monarchy needs to feel prepared, not improvised. Her public image suggests calmness rather than ambition, steadiness rather than spectacle, and service rather than self-promotion. In a modern age, that may be one of the monarchy's most valuable assets. The institution cannot survive on ceremony alone. It needs people who can make ceremony feel meaningful, people who can carry old symbols without making them look remote, cold, or disconnected from ordinary life. Catherine has become one of those people. For William, that matters profoundly. A future king does not stand alone in the public imagination. His reign will be judged not only by his decisions, but by the emotional world around him, his family, his consort, his sense of continuity, and the trust people feel when they look at the monarchy he represents. Catherine strengthens that image because she gives the future reign a human center. She makes it easier for the public to picture the next chapter not as a rupture, but as a continuation. And that may be why the idea of guardianship feels so symbolically powerful. A guardian is not simply someone who holds access. A guardian carries responsibility. A guardian protects meaning from damage, confusion, or careless use. If Catherine is being discussed in that language, even through unconfirmed reports, it shows how the public and royal observers are beginning to understand her role. She is no longer only a beloved royal figure. She is increasingly seen as someone who may be trusted with the emotional stability of the crown itself. Yet the story also reveals the difficulty facing Charles and Camilla. Charles must protect the dignity of his own reign while allowing the next one to gather strength. That is not an easy balance. If the future is held back too tightly, the monarchy risks looking unprepared. If the future is brought forward too visibly, the present can appear weakened. The king's challenge is therefore not only constitutional or ceremonial. It is emotional. He must make the monarchy look continuous without making his own chapter feel already concluded. Camilla's position remains equally delicate. She belongs to the present reign in a way that is both personal and institutional. Her public role beside Charles is part of his story, and that story must be respected. But the long-term symbolic future does not move through her. It moves through William and Catherine. That does not erase Camilla's place, but it does explain why stories about the crown's deepest symbols naturally begin to gather around the Princess of Wales. This is the quiet reality of succession. It does not begin only when a crown is placed on a head. It begins when the public starts to believe that someone is ready. It begins when symbols gather around a future role. It begins when a person's presence at state occasions feels less like support and more like preparation. It begins when the nation starts to imagine not only who will inherit power, but who can carry its emotional weight. That is what royal observers will be watching next. They will watch Catherine's ceremonial appearances. They will study which jewels appear, which remain unseen, and which moments place her closer to the monarchy's historic language. They will watch William's role beside her, Charles's public framing of the next generation, and Camilla's continued place within the present reign. None of those details alone will explain everything, but together they may reveal how carefully the monarchy is arranging its future image. And that is why this story matters, even while its central claim remains unconfirmed. It reveals a monarchy in transition, not necessarily through formal announcements, but through perception, trust, and symbolism. It shows that the public is already looking beyond the present reign toward the next. It suggests that Catherine's authority may grow not through titles being granted today, but through the slow recognition that she is becoming one of the central figures through whom the crown's future will be understood. So what do you think? Was this simply one royal development, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the monarchy? Is Catherine being quietly prepared as the symbolic guardian of the crown's next chapter, or are royal watchers reading too much into an unconfirmed claim? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. Because in the end, the future of the monarchy may not be revealed first by a proclamation, a balcony appearance, or a coronation, but by the moment the public decides who looks ready to carry the crown before it is ever placed in their hands.